It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 129, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. My guest today, Chris Jagger, is the owner and operator of Blue Fox Farm, an organic vegetable farm in the Applegate Valley of Southern Oregon. He is also the owner and head consultant for Blue Fox Agricultural Services, a full-service agricultural supply and consultation company focusing on ecological solutions for the modern farmer. Both his farm and his agricultural services use living soils as a foundation to scale farming operations efficiently and profitably. We discuss the changes Chris has seen in the organic and local marketplace and labor environment, and how Blue Fox Farm has worked to downsize in response to those changes. Chris shares how he has worked to determine what makes money with a sensible approach to crop budget analysis. We also dig into how Blue Fox Farm is getting better crops on a smaller piece of land, the economics of scaling up and scaling down, salad mix production, and the mechanization and the choices that Blue Fox Farm has made around that. It's worth noting here that Chris rounds out his involvement with the agricultural community by hosting the Living Soils Symposium each March. The symposium is an interactive conference for farmers interested in regenerative farming techniques to exchange knowledge and gain insight in a peer-to-peer environment. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. And by Farmers Web, software for your farm. Farmers Web makes it easier to work with your buyers, saving time, reducing errors, and increasing your capacity to work with more buyers overall. FarmersWeb.com. And by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. Chris Jagger, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I'd like to start off today, like we usually do, by having you tell us about Blue Fox Farm. They're in Applegate, Oregon. How many acres are you farming? What are things like in Applegate? What kind of crops you grow on, and how are you selling them?
Yeah, so my wife Melanie and I have been here for, this is our 15th season here. We have about 40 acres that we manage, and we started at 1 acre and we've worked our way up. This year, actually, we're farming considerably less acreage, about 12 and a half acres. We grow a range, like so many folks doing what we're doing. We grow a range of just about everything, except for the stuff that doesn't make us any money. And pretty much an A to Z. We start in March and usually go through almost Christmas time. And we have two properties that we farm on. We have our home property where everything is propagated. And then about 5 miles away, we have all of our growing acreage. So we have a piece that's 15 acres over there, another piece that we lease that's 17, and another piece that's 6. So that's kind of the overview of what we're up to. And then we sell at local area farmers markets, wholesale to some of the co-ops around the area, restaurants. And then we do some wholesale distribution through a regional distribution company.
When you say you do some wholesale distribution, you're selling to a wholesale distributor. You're not doing the distribution yourself, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
You just listed off a lot more than 12 and a half acres of rental ground for your vegetables. Yes. Why so much ground relative to the 12 and a half acres that you said you're actually farming in vegetables this year?
Yeah, so that's a pretty long discussion, I guess, in some respects. So we've been up to about 37 acres in actual production. That was about 3 years ago. And we're seeing the overall landscape change as far as labor availability, market access, just the coming of age of organics. And so we've tapered back over the last couple of years to a more manageable level that we can get the size of crew that we need to support it. And luckily we have a lot of tools of mechanization that we've bought over the years as we were scaled up bigger, that allows us to work these smaller acreages more effectively and more efficiently now. So that's kind of a nice advantage of having been a little bit bigger, and now we're scaling back, but we still have all these bigger scale tools available to us.
So American business would say that if you're not growing, you're dying. Are you guys dying, or are you making smart choices about getting smaller?
Well, I think that's debatable and to be seen. You know, I mean, there is. I think that there's a massive shift happening right now in our agricultural and food-based systems, and I think organics has been insulated from it somewhat for a long time. And now, as we see organics coming of age, we're seeing a lot of consolidation happening, a lot of bigger, like the big box store mentality jumping into organics. And so it's making, there is a disparity now between the economy of scale that makes sense to be successful anymore. I mean, there's a, like, being very small scale and being very large scale. There's these two areas that you can find success in profitability. And then there's this dead zone in between. And there's always been a dead zone in between. But we're just seeing that dead zone widen a little bit. So we're kind of on one of those edges right now, and we're trying to assess exactly how we're going to approach this into the future. And as you probably know, and so many of your listeners know, it's one of those things that as we're trying to figure out what the next step is, you have to keep going. You have to keep farming as well. So it's been a very calculated move to scale back. We've seen all of these changes coming over the last 3 or 4 years, and we didn't want to just wait and get the carpet pulled out from underneath us. So we've made these adjustments on the fly as we've been going, and we're doing okay right now. But really, our biggest challenge being labor anymore. That we just kind of watch it unfold day to day and make adjustments on the fly. That's kind of how you have to roll.
That labor's a really hard nut to crack, especially in an area like the one that you're in. You guys are located kind of between Grants Pass and Medford down in southern Oregon, so kind of just north of the California state line. But Medford's a mid-sized city. You know, Grants Pass isn't huge either. What is your source of labor in that area?
Well, it's changed throughout the years. When we first started farming, the world of internships were still very strong. My wife and I both started as interns on farms in California and Colorado. And so we kind of followed course. Once we started our farm, we worked with the intern world a lot through ATRA. And at that time, that was like the early stages of the strength of the internet. And so people were still mailing in applications, and there was there's that whole process of finding an internship on a farm. And as time went on, we found that there started being some labor disputes, not with us, but with other farms here on the West Coast, and kind of started looking at the legality of internships. And so that was a real eye-opener for the agricultural community out here. So instead of just waiting to, again, get the carpet pulled out from underneath us, we started looking at like, well, maybe that's not the right way to go. And so we started looking into hiring labor. And so that came down to just putting the word out, word of mouth. There's always been a migrant labor workforce that passes through this area because of the orchards and vineyards. And so we tapped into that network somewhat. And so we just kind of found whatever would work. And we're just starting to see those access points for labor kind of drying up now, whether it's the work ethic of our younger folks in our country that are shifting away from wanting to do the work that we do. The minimum wage is going up, and so people are finding other jobs that are easier, that are paying much better, because we're not subject to all the same laws as far as other industries are with labor. And we're just seeing, well, and honestly, we're seeing a lot of the migrant workforce getting drawn into other realms. And a lot of folks that like the Latin-based community, a lot of them are actually going back to their home countries now. And so we saw a large egress of those folks. So we had people that were working with us that were from Mexico and elsewhere. And a lot of them just went back because they had been here for 4 generations. And they said, we've saved enough money. I think we're going to go back home now. And I totally understand that. So a lot of the combination of all those things are definitely putting a damper on the labor force. So.
I mean, those are some really interesting dynamics that you're talking about that don't really have anything to do with whether or not you guys are good employers.
Totally. Yeah. It's, we've always thought of ourselves as being pretty sharp-minded about what we were doing. We definitely got into this for an ideal and an ethical and moral approach to farming, but you also have to approach all of that with sustainability of economics in mind. And so we always knew we had to be good business owners and good planners and good record keepers. And you can do all of those things perfectly. But there are some variables that just are out of our control, and labor is one of those in some respects. So we've just had to learn how to adapt. And, there's definitely some evenings that we're scratching our heads saying, man, what are we going to do here? And the answer maybe isn't immediately apparent. So yeah, it's a very interesting time.
As you've shrunk the farm from 40 acres down to 12 and a half acres of vegetable production, has that been a process of just, shrinking the amount of everything that you grow, or have you guys been cutting crops and trying to focus more on the crops that are bringing you lots of dollars? How have you gone about that process?
Yeah, that's exactly what we've done. Is not just we haven't just shrunk the whole farm down. We've definitely adapted what crops we're growing. So I live for marketing. I love marketing because it's a real illustration of what our culture is doing. As far as you give out, you say to the marketplace, hey, this is what I have to offer. And they respond back with like, yes, we want it, or no, we don't. And so I pay a lot of attention to that over the years. I've at farmers markets, when I'm retailing or wholesaling to our retailers, I just see what the marketplace wants. And so we've adapted the crops that are making good return for us, crops that don't take a lot of excessive amounts of labor, like hand labor, whatever we can do with any of the machines that we have, we focus on that. And then we have looked at expanding into value-added markets. Something that we've done that a lot of other farms probably haven't done is we look at value-added markets that we don't process the vegetables into that value-added product. We just supply the vegetables to other friends or business associates that are doing the value-added ourselves. And that really cuts back on our costs. Like one example is we have a hot sauce company that is based out of a restaurant in our area, and their demand for classically fermented hot sauces just keeps growing exponentially every year. And so we've found a way to grow the peppers and hot peppers on scale. We don't spend a lot of time trellising. And then the neat thing that we do is I have the hot sauce company, like employees and business owners, they come in and they actually do the picking of the peppers for us. So we grow the peppers, they come in and pick them, and then there's no cold because they know exactly what they want for their hot sauce. So they come in and pick all the peppers that they need, and then process them. And then I sell them the peppers for a discounted rate. And then I'm also paying their labor as they're out in the field. So it's kind of this win-win situation. And we've found that really makes things a lot more efficient as far as the bottom line goes. So it just ideas like that is what we're looking at. Is like we don't want to get defeated by the change of agriculture, but we want to be creative. I mean, that's what we are. We're farmers are living artists, as far as I'm concerned. We're making art on the fly. And so we just look at these things and say, well, how can we adapt? And so that's like one of those examples of what we're doing.
talking about shrinking the farm, choosing crops to grow where the market is there. Have you also, you mentioned earlier that you don't grow veg that doesn't make you guys money. How are you determining what makes you money and what doesn't?
It's the classic crop budget analysis, just crunching the numbers. And we have a system set up that gives us a baseline. So the classic problem with budget, like crop budget analysis, is it works great whenever you have one or two crops, because it's really easy to figure out all your fixed costs and then your variable costs. But whenever you're growing, 35 to 60 crops, it's always really challenging. It's like, well, how do I equate all this? So over the years, we've kind of come up with a baseline number for all of those fixed costs, and we put that into our formula when we're calculating it. And then so it's just it's not perfect, but every time we run the numbers, it always comes out and seems pretty darn accurate to us. So we kind of have that baseline that we have that involves the transplant costs and all that. And then the other costs that are crop specific, then we dial those in. So we just kind of look at those numbers and see how it pans out. But something else that we take into account that probably doesn't fit into that crop budget analysis is the emotional sustainability of our workers. And so we used to grow tons of strawberries, and every time that we got to the strawberries, we knew that our margins were getting tighter and tighter each year. But every time that we would go to pick strawberries, I could just see the morale of our crew just, tank, just dip all the way down. And I started looking at it, I was like, man, is it really worth having my crew be really upset not necessarily at me, but just at what we were doing, and just have them be drained? Is it really worth that? So we always put that into, it's probably not formula based, but we put that into when we're trying to figure out whether the crops are going to continue with us. We put that into play as well. It's just like, how does the crew feel about it? Like, are people amped about it? Like peppers can be somewhat labor intensive, but everybody that's picking them, especially because it's the hot sauce company that's picking them, they live for peppers. And so their morale is always very high. So that's how we weigh and balance what we're going to do with our crops.
And what kind of record keeping are you doing to support that crop specific cost analysis?
Yeah. So we have, we're spreadsheet maniacs. So we do as much as we can with spreadsheets, but we're also not out there taking data points for every single thing we do. We've been at this, for Melanie and I have been farming together for about 20 years now. So we kind of know the process and know the flow, and we've consolidated from about 5 spreadsheets down to 1 now. And so it's just, materials in and materials out kind of information, and it's all looped into our harvest records that we have. And it also really has been, having these consolidated records has made our certification process, like when we're getting inspected, a lot easier, because there's a lot of data all on one sheet. So that's the main way we track all of this info. And then we also, something else that we've implemented in the last couple years that works really well is we have a email account set up that's just all of our record keeping that we do on the farm. So anybody that works here on the farm and has information that is of value, whether it's crop observations or harvest data, or what we've sprayed on the fields as far as amendments or crop protectants or any of that kind of stuff, I just have any of the folks just email that address directly, and then we just have everything there. So at the end of the year, whenever I go in and I'm trying to build out my amendment application sheet for my inspector, all the information's there, and it's all organized by date, and so that's been really helpful too, to track all of that info. And almost everybody has a smartphone now on the farm, and so you can send an email from anywhere.
That would be a different address from the email address that I emailed you at to set up this interview. This is something that's dedicated just for a record keeping space.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just a Gmail address that, anybody, I've had other farms do the same thing. I was like, yeah, just call it like record keeping your name of your farm, at gmail.com or something like that. Just something that everybody in-house knows what it is. That's just solely for that and nothing else.
So you said that you and Melanie have been farming together for 20 years, but you started farming at Blue Fox Farm in 2003. What was your background prior to coming and starting Blue Fox Farm?
Yeah, so Melanie and I started farming in Santa Cruz in 1997. She was at the UCSC studying agroecology. I had just come out of Alaska in the fish industry, and we both had this strong desire to figure out where our food came from. And so once we met, we kind of realized that we were on this similar path. And as she was finishing up her studies there at UCSC, we were like, well, we want to keep doing this. How are we going to figure this out? We worked for the Molino Creek Collective, which there were some of the first folks that did dry farm tomatoes. We worked with Joe at Dirty Girl Farm for a bit, helping him out when he was first getting going. And then we both went the full season internship route. And so we ended up out in Colorado. She was interning on a farm called Guidestone Farm. They were one of the first legal raw milk dairies in Colorado through a membership-based program. And she was interning on the CSA garden space there. And then I worked for a farm that was about 30 miles south of there called Pachamama Organic Farm. That was in Longmont. And we both worked there for a season and then went back to California for a year I built homes for a year just to save up some money. And then we were both offered a management position at Guidestone. And so she and I went back out to Guidestone and managed their garden space for another 2 seasons and got married there. So that was kind of how we got our management chops working on farms. And then at that point, we were married in 2002, and then we came out here and tried to figure out what we were going to do here, and then bought our property in 2003.
What brought you to Southern Oregon?
Happen chance, I think. I don't really know. We still aren't really sure how we ended up out here. It was one of those things that we were looking to buy land on the western slope of Colorado, but it was kind of out of our price range. And Melanie's dad had a friend at work down in Los Angeles that had mentioned about retiring up to Medford. And she and I had been through the Ashland area in our travels over the years up and down the West Coast. And we're like, yeah, that area looks pretty cool. And then we kind of started investigating the Applegate Valley, and it was a lot more affordable at that point in time. And we really analyzed what markets were here, not just the farmers markets, but the overall marketplace, and said, is there a place for us to fit in here? And talked with a lot of the elder farmers here and said, can we fit in here? Does it make sense for us to come in? And everybody was like, yes, please come here. We need more farmers. So it just kind of fell into place. And, finding a property, even then was challenging because of all the constraints that we needed. But we found this neat old dairy that was priced unbelievably well. And something that people always ask me was like, how did you pull this off? You're poor young farmers. Like, how are you going to buy this place? And, the only way that we could have done it was the fact that Melanie's parents helped us out. They put the down payment on the property. And I will be eternally grateful to them for doing that. And they looked at it this way. They said, someday whenever we pass on, we're going to leave you an inheritance of part of our estate or whatever. But at that point in your life, hopefully you don't need it. So why don't we put that money down now to help you guys get on this path of farming that you're so passionate about? And I've always thought that was amazing that they were able to do that for us, because they saw our vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And so they put that down payment, and that was just what we needed to be able to then to start from the ground up. And we honestly did. We saved money while we were managing Guidestone's garden, and saved enough for our first tractor and got out here, and it was shoestring. I mean, it was just Melanie and I when we started, and we were doing everything, watering, planting, harvesting, doing markets, and get up at 3 a.m. to start irrigation before we had to go to the market. I mean, it was real shoestring, and we just started building and making sure that we were just paying as we went. We never took out loans other than our mortgage, and just worked within our means. It was really important to us.
Were you both full-time on the farm from day one?
The first season, no. The first season, I was actually building my brother-in-law's house, because Melanie's sister and her sister's husband, they share this property with us as well. So it is a true family affair. They're not in farming, but they're supportive of what we're doing. And so I was building their house for them. And so that was kind of a neat thing where they had sold their house in San Diego, and then the profits from that went to me to build their house, which then gave me money to put into the farm to get things going. So the first year, I both farmed and built their house. And then Melanie and our good friend came out and ran the small garden space. I think we had 1.5 acres or 2 acres that first year. And then the next year I said, man, I just have to take the leap of faith and just do this. So we had saved enough capital to make sure we had our costs covered for, I think it was about 6 months. Like regardless of what happened with the farm, we knew we were covered for 6 months. So that gave us a 6-month window to just really put the work in.
And then how quickly did you guys scale up? Because you said, 1 acre in your first year, that seems like a pretty reasonable sized market farm for getting started, especially with the kind of experience that you guys were bringing to it. But then how quickly did you scale up to that 40 acres?
Yeah, so it went each subsequent year, it went 1, 4, 7, 12, and then we were at 12 for 2 or 3 years. And then when we bought our production piece, because there were some other leases that we had that we don't farm at all anymore. But once we bought our production piece, then we were at like 15 for another year or something like that. And then it was a pretty drastic jump. Once we got to 15, then I think the following 2 or 3 years, we were above 20 acres in production. And then we maxed out at 37 acres in actual production, and we were there for just I think a year or two, and then we started tapering back because the marketplace kind of changed rapidly. It was mostly based on our wholesale experience. There were some big box stores that kind of moved into the area and kind of swooped some business from our distributor, and it kind of changed the game really quickly. So it was this, I would say it was a gradual increase, and then we kind of got to this maintained level in the 20 to 30 acre range, and then we kind of peaked out for a single year. And if it had kept going, I don't know if we would have scaled up more, but I think we would have kept at that like 35 to 40 acres. That was a nice scale to be at. It was a big crew. I think we had 17 people on staff that year. With some of that being part-time folks, we probably had 7 full-time people that year, something like that. When
that marketplace shifted, did that happen while you had crops in the ground? Were you left with stuff out in the field?
Yeah, we were. Yes. And some of it, I worked hard to find other outlets for it. And some of it I just tilled under, I'm not an opponent of tilling crops under, because I'm always feeding the soil back anyway. That's what I've always said, is that we're building our soil, and the vegetables just happen to be a byproduct that allows us to continue feeding our soil. So I'm okay with doing that. And I think that some of the reason that we've been able to do things like that is because we don't have a lot of debt looming over our heads. Other than our mortgage, we pretty much own everything because we've paid as we've gone. And so that gave us the flexibility to just say, well, it's the marketplace isn't there, so let's turn this under. We don't need to be managing this crop at this point, and so that's what you do.
And so you bought production land that was 5 miles down the road, right?
Right.
Okay, so I've farmed land that was at a distance from my home farm, and that's hard.
Yeah, it can be. What we learned quickly was I made sure that anything I needed both at home or at the other farm, I had one of each at each spot. And here at home, because this was basically just where our propagation houses were and not really any production, that made it pretty easy to do that. And I kind of looked at it as I had to go home at the end of the day, and that was a good thing. We have 2 kids. We have 2 boys. They're 9 and 7. And so I make an effort to get out of there by, 5 or 5:30 each day. And I learned really quickly to just let go of having to have everything be perfect and dialed in. Because as you know, and everybody knows, that there's always a list of things to do on the farm, and it'll still be in there in the morning. Of course, I didn't let the time sensitive stuff, get swept under the carpet, but there's always things that can be done later. So, we just figured it out, and it's made me become a better farm manager too, is because if I had a really loose system over there, I don't think it would be able to maintain with me being at home over here. It's just been the way that the perspective that I've taken on it, and it hasn't really been too bad. So
when you say that you didn't have a loose system over there, I'm going to assume you had a tight system over there. What did that tight system look like? Was that a system of observation? Was it a system of record keeping? Was it just a system of having a way that things work?
Basically, I worked hard to come up with SOPs or standard operating procedures for how the farm works. So, it's just, you take the framework of the farm and you reverse engineer. You say, this is the end result that I'm trying to get. How am I going to get back to, square one from the end result? And so every step of the way, you just build that out as far as, okay, with my irrigation, like you take each aspect of the farm and you break it down. So like irrigation is a really good one. So irrigation is all on timers, and irrigation also is how we do a lot of our fertility management through Mazzy injectors into the system. So we don't have a lot of walking through the fields and spraying crops for foliar sprays. We inject it into our irrigation system, just so efficiencies like that make the system work really well, having timers on everything. That's one aspect. I use the internet to my advantage a lot. So having like a security camera on the thermometer for the walk-in cooler, so I can look at what the walk-in cooler is doing from a distance. Just little ideas like that. I just tried to implement as many systems that I could to have redundancies, so things wouldn't fail, or if they did fail, I would know about it and could go back over. And then just organizing our barn system and our wash and pack system into an efficient space, and just having everything have its own home. Yeah. Now, if you mentioned all this to any of the folks that have worked with me in the past, some people would laugh because they would say, well, there's days where you look in there and you're like, oh my gosh, everything's in a state of disarray. But underneath it all, there is this framework that's there supporting it, that you can kind of reorganize and clean up at the end of the day and start anew, So it's systems management. I mean, that's really what farming is. And it's something that I'm always really excited about, is figuring out how to manage these systems in holistic manners that work for everybody. So
it sounds like you've got the packing shed and your cooling facilities. Those are on the remote farm in the production space.
Yep. Pretty much everything is over at the production farm except for our propagation houses. And the only reason the propagation houses are still here is because that's my wife's realm. She's always taking care of the management of the propagation greenhouses, and she's here at home with our boys. And so it was just a way for her to keep touch with what's going on. And then she does all the office work here too, out of our home office. So it kind of worked well to keep it at that. If we were ever to hand that side of things off to, say, our farm manager or somebody else on the farm, then we'd probably consider moving the propagation houses over to the other farm as well.
Again, you've talked about shrinking the farm. It still leaves a lot of land that you're not managing in vegetables. What are you doing with the rest of that land? Have you incorporated it into your vegetable rotation?
Yeah, so a lot of cover cropping, a lot of bare fallow, a lot of trying to knock down the weed seed bank. Our fields were dairy pasturing land for years. So as you know, that cows are awesome processors of green matter, but they also pass a lot of weed seeds through. And so there's a large weed seed bank out there. And so that's something that we've had to manage over the years and trying to figure out how to do that. And that's through cover crop management and just like bare fallow management. But yeah, it's really nice actually to have more space to be able to work with. And we're kind of spreading some of our beds out too. So if there's a section that we want more airflow for something to, say, control powdery mildew or downy mildew management, you can put, space between the beds, where it used to be we just like have to cram everything in there. There's a lot of things that we used to do 3 rows to a bed that we're doing 1 or 2 rows to a bed now. So, and in some respects, we're learning that we're getting better crops out of the field by not just trying to have that high density planting. So it's neat to see how these changes, I mean, you can look at these downscaling as like oh man, this is a total bummer, but I've really looked at it as like well, what can we learn from this and what can we gain from this and what can we do to become better farmers because of this? And I think that just having all this space really it's pretty awesome.
Tell me a little bit about the climate there in Applegate, Oregon.
It's somewhat similar to Colorado. It's somewhat of a semi-arid desert. We get around 30 inches of rain a year in a good year. I think more normal is probably 17 to 20. This last year we had, I don't know how much we had, but we had a ton, which was great. But all that rain comes in the off season. So most of that rain is from November through, say, April. So during the summertime, you never have rain, so we're fully dependent on irrigation out of the river that runs by the farm. And daytime temperatures range in the middle of the summer. Like right now, we're in the low to mid 90s. We'll definitely move up into the hundreds every once in a while. It's rare that we'll hit over 100 for more than 3 or 4 days, but it can happen. And then the humidity here is very low. And so that means the night times cool off considerably. And so that's really nice too. From a crop growth standpoint, it's funny, people up north in the northern part of Oregon are always surprised because they can get certain crops before we can. And they're like, well, you're so much further south. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you have so much more humidity. Your nighttime temperatures don't dip. And so your plants don't really stop growing. Ours will definitely, they stall out at night and then they start back up again in the morning. So, but just the way that the climate is here, it gives us amazing control over our crops. There's a lot of seed producers around here, small scale seed producers. And that's one of the reasons why they're so successful, is because they can control the irrigation fully. And the latitude that we're at has this angle of incidence. For whatever reason, things just grow like bonkers here. So we just get massive growth. Once we get to that sweet spot in the early summer, I guess, actually, like usually by June 15th, it's like June 15th to August 15th, you put anything in the ground and it grows so fast. It's amazing. So that's really nice because you can roll succession after succession of things through and just have a constant supply for your marketplaces.
Chris, with that, we're going to stop, take a break, get a word from a couple of sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Chris Jagger from Blue Fox Farm in Southern Oregon. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by Vermont Compost Company, makers of Fort V and Fort Light potting mixes. When you're growing transplants, all of the investments you've made in plant materials, heat, labor, and overhead depend on the performance of the media where you expect your plants to grow. And if you're an organic grower, you're probably using a media based on compost, and you should be looking for the best compost. Most organic potting soils have two basic parts, the compost and everything else. At Vermont Compost Company, Carl Hammer and his crew are very intentional about the inputs they use in their compost. While they're making use of waste products, waste disposal is not their primary goal. Ingredients are sourced consciously and with the end in mind. The same goes for the everything else part. Like the best in art, everything in Vermont compost potting soils has a purpose, whether it's the chips of ocean blue granite or the kelp that provides micronutrients and a little smell of the ocean. Fully composted compost, top quality ingredients, and a real sense for the art and science of plant production, combined with a real commitment to organic growing professionals to create a consistent product year after year. And in something that's subject to as many variables as market farming, it's nice to have something you can count on. VermontCompost.com. Support is also provided by Farmers Web, software for your farm. Farmers Web makes it easy to work with your buyers, saving you time, increasing efficiency, reducing mistakes, and streamlining order management. Farmers Web helps you manage orders from buyers who place them online and also from those that order by phone or email. Use Farmers Web to generate a product catalog for buyers, allow buyers to view your real-time availability online, and create harvest lists and packing slips for your orders. Farmers Web helps you inform your buyers of delivery routes, pickup locations, lead times, and more, while helping you keep track of special pricing and customer information. You can also download detailed financial reports. Farmers Web offers a free account type and a flat monthly fee on paid plans. You can pause, cancel, or switch plan types at any time. Check out a demo video and Farmers Web's guide to working with wholesale buyers at farmersweb.com. All right, and we're back with Chris Jagger from Blue Fox Farm in Applegate, Oregon. So, Chris, you talked about that you guys have done a lot of mechanization on your farm, in part because you grew up to such a large size that you scaled up the equipment that you needed to do that, and now you've still got it now that you're running at 12 and a half acres. And I want to talk some about what you've mechanized and how that's gone, but I'm also curious, if you were targeting a 12 and a half acre farm, would you have the degree of mechanization that you have now? Could you have afforded that? And would it still make sense if you hadn't invested in it when you were scaling up to a larger scale than where you're at?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I talked about not being in debt and how important that was for us to pay as we have gone. That was something that we did because of where the industry was at that time when we got into it. Now, if I was to get into it today, 2017, if I was 21 years old again, our world and our economy and our agricultural system have all changed. And I think that if I was to do it all over again, I probably would take some loans out. I would make sure that I had a marketplace before I did that. But I would take some loans out, and I probably would mechanize from the get-go. If somebody asked me, what should I do? I would say, here's a punch list of the tools that you need. Let's think of a system and a time frame that you can buy those into the farm. But I just think that mechanization is honestly the key, even on a small scale. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I just don't think that the labor pool is there for us or is going to be there for a lot of other folks in the future. So as much as you can figure out how to mechanize, I think that that's a real advantage. And I think a lot of people are scared of mechanizing because they feel that it takes away from the artisanship of this craft. But I really feel like when you mechanize, it allows you to spend more time with the most important thing, which is the crops. So as we mechanized, I was like, man, I have so much more time now to walk the field, to do crop walks, to do crop observations. And so it just refocused where my energies went. Instead of just being out there being like, man, I've got to get this bed of carrots weeded by hand today. I was out in the field walking around saying, oop, I've got some aphid pressure here, or I've got, this pressure there, or man, we need to harvest this next week. So I definitely would mechanize.
Where did you guys start with mechanization?
With mechanization, we started with the classic ACG, the Allis-Chalmers G tractor, and we actually were one of the first to do the electrical conversion. We don't have that tractor with us anymore because we actually scaled up to a level that it didn't really work for us to keep with the electric tractor. We needed more hours in the field than it could give us. So we started with an ACG and a basket weeder and sweeps, and just really built up from there. And then we got a Farmall Super A that we got some finger weeders for. The finger weeder story is kind of an interesting one. That was before finger weeders were really seen here in the U.S. And it was the early days of YouTube. And I just happened to be searching all around for tools and equipment. And I saw this company Crest out of Europe. And I actually used Google Translate at that time to order them directly from Germany, which was always a little terrifying. Like, I'm wiring this money to this unknown company in Germany. Let's hope they show up. And 8 weeks later, there they were. So we used the finger weeders. And then honestly, the game changer for us has been flame weeding. Once not a walk behind flame weeder, but a tractor mounted flame weeder that we built in-house. And we used the Red Dragon burners, the liquid propane burners. And once we got the flame weeding, like stale bed prep down, that was the game changer for us. That cut our labor costs by 35-40%, as far as hand labor costs go. And so that was the big one for us.
Just simply because you eliminated the hand weeding.
Yep, exactly.
It looks like you guys do a lot of salad mix production. Can you tell me about the system that you're using for that?
Sure. It's been pretty standard in all the years that we've been here. We've changed the varieties over the years and kind of fine-tuned those. But we do a 5-row system. We plant or we seed every week. And over the years, we've gone from planting in blocks, which we would do each variety within its own block. And so you'd have a block of red, and then a block of the green leaf, and then a block of the Tango, or the Lola Rosa or whatever. And then you'd have the spicy green block. And then a few years ago, we realized that it was a lot more efficient to just plant in rows. So now we have 10 varieties of lettuces and greens, and we plant those in 2 beds that each bed has 5 rows to it. So each row is a different variety. And we've never done the pre-mixed salad mix seed, just because if we have disease or there's certain varieties that the cucumber beetles love over others. When we saw that we would have the pre-mix, it's really hard to cut around that. So it's nice if you have the specific varieties in their own row, because even if you have that row is no good anymore, you can just skip it and go on to another one. As far as harvesting goes, we have tried everything under the sun, and we are back to knife harvesting everything. And we do a cut and cut again kind of process. So we'll generally get 3 to 4 cuts off of a succession, sometimes more, sometimes less. And we definitely don't grow baby greens. We grow what we call adolescent greens. We let them get a little bit bigger. We feel like they have better flavor. They don't just taste like watery vegetable matter. They've got better flavor, and it just allows us to cut longer. We've sold bulk salad mix. We've sold clamshells. We've sold at the farmer's market, pre-bagged and bulk and all that. And now we're kind of to the point that we're just selling bulk salad mix at the farmer's markets and to some local grocery stores. And that really is due to the fact that the big organic salad mix producers have really pushed hard to drop their prices down to the point that they're on a scale that they can sell it out on the floor for basically what we'd have to wholesale it for to make any money. So we've definitely scaled back on our salad mix production because we're up against that big box mentality now. But we still pride ourselves on having a good quality mix.
It is such a hard thing when you think about how the organic industry has developed, and those specialty crops like salad mix that used to be the province of smaller growers. When I worked at Harmony Valley Farm here in Wisconsin in 1993, we were selling salad mix wholesale for $6 a pound. And I think that when I buy salad mix at retail at the food co-op now, I think I pay $7. There's nothing else that I can think of that has undergone or has failed to undergo a similar inflationary pressure. The prices they've stayed the same forever, or if not gone down.
Yep, it's so interesting to see that food is still the cheapest thing that we have going, and it's one of those most challenging things where you have customers that will balk at a 25-cent difference, yet still pay $5 for a latte. And I'll pay $5 for a latte too. But it's so interesting to just see that the base of our nutrition, is something that doesn't have more value to it. And I haven't been able to figure out how to change that. And I'm not sure that's a whole nother show right there.
Yeah. If not a whole nother year's worth of shows. I mean, that's just, it's like, it's so fundamental. And the funny thing is, Chris, and I don't know if you experience this, but sometimes I'll be in the store and I'll go, it'll be some product, organic stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to pay that for the organic. And then I'm like, wait, this is me that I'm talking about here. I'm going to pay that. But, I sometimes have some price shock too. And I'm a true believer. I've been in the industry for 25 years, almost all my life now. So
yeah, it's really interesting, and it's one of those things too, that it's like something that I've moved on to is like, well, what is that next step? Like, we've worked so hard to get the organic industry to the point of where it's no longer an infant, it's now a teenager, I guess. And how do we take that consumer education to that whole next level? And I believe it's nutrient dense crops, and it's high brix crops, all of those kind of things. But man, that's a whole nother realm of education. Like, it feels like people are just starting to understand organics, and we're going to hit them with like, okay, now you have to learn this whole world too, and so it's a big challenge, and I'm really curious to see how things develop over the next 10 to 15 years for food in our country.
I noticed on your Instagram feed that you guys are using a yeoman's plow or a keyline plow for your primary tillage. Would you tell me about how you go about your tillage and bed shaping, and are you guys on a raised bed system there?
Yeah, so that's another thing that has evolved over the years. Our main setup goes like this. If we take it from a cover crop standpoint, like let's say we have an overwintered cover crop, and oats and peas is usually what we do in the winter, and it's up around 4 to 6 feet tall by the time we're ready to take it down. We generally will flail mow that, and then depending on the field, we will use a mold board plow. And I know that sometimes is a curse word in the world of soil fertility. But it's again, one of those things. It's not the tool, it's how you use it. And so we've always really focused a lot on using the mold board to go just below the root zone of the cover crop and not down into the substrata layers of soil. And so we'll just flip that top layer onto itself, let that break down, and then we'll go through and disc the ground. And once the ground is disked and ready to roll, we'll usually go through with a yeoman's plow. And we have a yeoman's plow that has 3 shanks, but we generally only use 2 shanks on it. And we will rip as deep as we can. We can usually get down to about 20 to 22 inches. And we use a pretty high horsepower tractor for that. So we will usually rip the field, and we generally rip right over where our beds are going to be. So that pass with the yeoman's plow is set up on the same spacing that we're going to be bedding up, which is a 4-foot bed top. So we'll rip where the beds are going to be, and then we go through and we pre-list the beds with a bed shaper that we've built in-house. And the bed shaper is basically kind of a evolution of design off of, I think originally it was Jim Leap, who used to be at UC Santa Cruz. He had this bed recycler, which was basically a 3-point disc that then had some extra sweeps and disc killers involved into it, and then a shaper on the back. So we've kind of designed our own system for that, that we'll use that to pre-list the beds. And then we go through and irrigate that whole area if we need to, depending on the time of year. And that will get that initial weed seed flush to come up. And then we'll come back and shape the beds with the bed shaper as well. And then do another light irrigation to get that second weed flush to come up. And then when that second weed flush comes up, then we'll go through and flame weed those beds. And then ideally, then you plant into it, whether it's direct seed or transplant the next day. And so the bed shaper does make a raised bed for us. It's about, it's probably depending on the soil conditions, it's between 6 and 9 inch raised bed. And once we got our raised bed system down, man, that's made our cultivation with the tractors so much easier, because when you have a raised bed, you have that much more clearance or I don't know how you say that, like more rise and fall with the implements to fine tune like how much soil you're moving and how much how aggressive your weeding action is. So that's our basic system.
Once you've got the beds made and you've done your pre-emergent weed control, how are you doing the seeding or the transplanting so that you make sure that those things are nice and centered on the top of the bed?
Yeah, so the bed shaper on the back, we have the shaping pan, and it has 3 very simple fingers coming off the back that mark where our rows are. And so we have a 3-row system. So whether we're planting 1, 2, or 3 rows, there's always 3 marks there on the top of the bed, and those are spaced 16 inches apart. And so then direct seeding, we still do it the old-fashioned way. We push a Jang or an Earthway seeder. Really like the Jang seeder, but there's certain crops that I just can't effectively seed with it still. So we still use the Earthway, even though it's kind of the bane of everybody's existence for whatever reason. I'm hoping that is Earthway one of your sponsors?
No, they're not. No, and it's a $79 seeder, right? I mean, you get what you pay for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it works. It does well, and we've custom fabricated plates for that for specific crops that we need. So we direct seed with those 2 seeders. I've looked into getting tractor mounted seeders. If we had stayed at a higher acreage, I would have definitely bought a vacuum seeder at some point in time. That works for us. And then we have a water wheel transplanter. It's a 3-row water wheel transplanter, and like a rain flow. And we transplant everything with that. And we have 3 seats on the back, even though a lot of times we only use the 2 and just have people switch off planting that 3rd row. So, yeah. And that once we got the water wheel transplanter, that was another one of those like, oh my gosh, why didn't we do that earlier kind of thing? Because the amount of wear and tear on our crew's body that helped save was amazing. Just how always being hunched over out there, and it's just so much more efficient, and people are so much happier to be able to just transplant off the seats in the back.
When we got a water wheel transplanter at Rock Spring Farm, I was a little disappointed at first because it didn't actually make us faster at transplanting. When we took you've got the driver and a spotter behind, and then the people riding on the machine, we could actually transplant by hand just as fast as we could with the water wheel. But what we discovered was the big difference was that at the end of the day, people weren't exhausted. They were ready to go do it again the next day.
Yep. That's one of those hidden costs that I think that we don't always look at as farmers, because we're just looking at the hard costs, and it's like, man, I put so much value in human resource management, and because without people, you've got nothing, it's just you. And so those are the little details that I've observed and we've made adjustments over the years, is like, how can we help our crew be healthier and better and more efficient and effective at what they do, and still be smiling and happy at the end of the day. So that's huge.
So that was actually something that that attracted me when somebody made the recommendation to get you on the show. That person said that you get, says that, not only is he a great talker, but he gets himself and his crew home at a reasonable hour every day. And it really, it struck me. I mean, that obviously speaks to a whole set of values. How do you go about that? I don't know. That's a really open-ended question, but I'm just going to say it. How do you go about that?
Just making sure that we get people home. Well, I mean, it comes down to knowing the workload, I think that a lot of farmers are gluttons for punishment. And we love plants. And so we always think we should plant more, and I've really paid attention to, like, if we plant this much more, is it really going to make us that much more money? So that's one of the biggest things, is making sure that we're just not planting more to plant more. And because I've seen it whenever we've taken it that extra step, and you just see the crew, just the morale just shift, And I've found too that over the years, like, yeah, you can be out there for 17 hours a day, but like, you're going to have people burn out. I mean, we have people burn out whether we're out there 8 hours or 17 hours, so we just have to be mindful of who the workforce is. And even if we don't like where the workforce is going overall with work ethic, because that's something that I hear from a lot of farmer friends, and I feel the same thing. We're like, are we just getting to be crotchety old farmers, or is the workforce's work ethic changing? And I really think that the workforce's ethic is changing, and it's due to a slew of things, but you have to, whether that's right or not, you still have to make adjustments according to that. So whether you like it or not, you have to say, this is what I'm working with. How can I do it to make sure that these people are healthy and happy, the best. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have bad days, and it's not going to sometimes just suck, like that's the reality of it too. That's life, and that's farming, is that you have the ups and downs. But it's just really paying attention to where people's energy levels are. And the other thing is that I think my crew knows that anything that they do is something that I would also do myself. And so I make sure that even if I can't always be out there, I make sure that I am out there some. So like right now, we have a pretty small crew, and I'm still the one that's cutting all the head lettuce every harvest day. And so even though I've got a million other things I could be doing, and I could train one of the folks to cut head lettuce, it's something that I know that I can say, like, it's a tedious job because we're in the heat of the summer. And so a lot of the lettuces will bolt, and a lot of them will get tip burn or whatever. And so you really have to pay attention. So I think it's more efficient for me to just cut it, but it's also a sign to my crew of like, hey, I'm out there still, like I'm out there slugging boxes and crates out of the field, just like you. And I think that really goes a long way. I think that makes people respect you. And it's not like I'm doing it just for show either. I'm doing it because I got to get the product out of the field, but it's those kind of like little things, they make a huge difference.
You talked a couple of times about observing and managing the energy level of your crew. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. A lot of my farming ethic or farming structure comes from a background in an interest in permacultural-based systems. And I think that the term permaculture gets thrown around a lot very loosely. But really, it comes down to a way to manage systems holistically. And a lot of times people think that that's just managing physical systems holistically. Like, how are you going to get your cows from point A to point B in a holistic manner? Or how are you going to, cut down on your carbon footprint to make sure that the system is more regenerative and all of that? But I'm really more intrigued in the humanistic and social aspect of permaculture. Like, how can we holistically manage people? And that means take into account that every human is an individual and that it's not just a number. And so you look at Joe or Valley and say, what are their strengths and what are their individual weaknesses, and how can I plug them into the right place here on the farm? And the other side of that is I try to make sure that I keep my emotions out of that decision making. And that's something that I've not always been good at, but I'm getting better over the years. And so by that, I mean, I try to look at people's strengths and weaknesses, plug them in where they are, and then know that if they don't like that they're going to have to trust that I'm putting them in that role for a reason, because I've assessed it from my standpoint. Now, I still mess up sometimes, and that's something else that I'm really open to, is saying, oh, I messed up, I should have put you over here. But it's just looking at the nuances of human beings, because that's the one thing that we're coming to this point in our society where everything is mechanized and replicated and similar and mass produced and commoditized. And the one thing that I am a big fan of is not commoditizing people. And that's the art of life, I think, is that each person is an individual. And so we can use that individuality to really create an awesome farm-based system that is working like no other farm would. Like, every farm is an individualistic thing. You know, you can't commoditize a farm. You can't really franchise I mean, you can franchise a farm, but from the standpoint that if I'm trying to do things, it's like, how is my farm different this year? And how do I tune it in this year to make it work the best? And then the next year, I always know it's not going to be the same at all. So just those kind of details, that's what's going through my mind every day when I'm also trying to manage the mechanical aspects of my farm. And so that's the beauty of being a human being, is that you can like manage things from a scientific standpoint and like your right mind, and then you can also manage things from an artistic standpoint, you know, the left side of your mind.
I always feel like managing things, you know, quote unquote, scientifically is, I don't know, it's easier, right? I mean, when you're trying to be an artist, you know, you really, what you're talking about with employees is paying attention to the differences. That puts a lot more work on you. I mean, I know that just from dealing with, I know that from dealing with employees. I mean, think about it, you know, with dealing with livestock. You know, it's a lot easier to just say, okay, crew, we're all going to go do this thing now. It's a lot different if you've got a crew of 7 or 8 people and you're trying to figure out where each person fits and to match up those strengths in every aspect of their job or of their workday.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and it's not like every move I'm like, okay, now how am I going to fine tune this for this person? It's more of an overall all-encompassing thing of like, oh, this person's really good with attention to detail. So of course I'm going to put them in the wash and pack area. And this person is a beast that they can just go out and they can run a weed eater all day and be content with it, as long as they can have their headphones on and listen to Slayer. You know, it's like that's more of the overall way that I assess the energetics on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, we still have to get the nuts and bolts done. And so it's a macro versus a micro observational kind of thing. It's like you have to decide how microscopic you want to get with it. But you know, it takes more work, but that's kind of my job, you know, is like being the owner, you know, like I rarely blame other people on the farm if something doesn't go right. It's usually me. It's all on me. Like, if so-and-so didn't do this, well, it's because I didn't set them up properly to do that. Now, if they just mess up and they just say, well, I'm not going to go harvest those carrots, and they walk off, then of course that's their fault. But if I say, hey, go harvest carrots, and they go out there and they harvest out of the wrong bed, well, it's my fault because I didn't say, hey, harvest carrots out of bed E8 and start halfway down, look for, you know, this marker, you know, that's why you should start picking there, and then only pick the ones that are over thumb size in diameter. You know, like those are the two differences. It's like I blame myself for not setting things up properly instead of blaming my employees. You know, that's my job as the farm owner. And sometimes I think people that are running things are just looking to get to that point where they can step back and not have to put in as much effort. They're like, okay, now I've made it. Now I'm just the owner, manager, boss, or whatever. And now I've got my crew is just going to do it. And they're going to figure it out. If they don't figure it out, I'm going to blame them for it. And I've never approached it like that. Like I've always said, like my job should get harder every year in a certain respect, because I'm just trying to make sure that the well-being of my crew is there. That's everything to me.
And I found, and it took me way too long to figure this out, but when I started taking responsibility for what was going on my farm and even in my other relationships and asking, what's my role in this and how do I get what I want out of this? It really shifted things for me. And when people were first describing it to me, and I spent a lot of time being very resistant to the idea that I was the problem. But once I realized that I was the problem, it was actually liberating. It helped me to understand. It gave me a sense of control that I hadn't had before, right? Because if you're working with crappy workers who are lazy, and that's the perspective that you have, and that's kind of the end all be all, there's really nothing you can do about that, right? But if the problem is that you didn't give them adequate instructions for how to harvest the carrots and which carrots to harvest, well, that's actually something you can do something about. That's actually something that you've got control over.
Yeah. And, the other side of what you said there too, is that if you have crappy workers, well, I hired them, that's the other side of it, is like, I hired them. So maybe I need to fire them, and that's part of kind of what I was mentioning about taking the emotion out of it too. Like when I first started farming, it's like, oh, I don't want to fire these people. Like, yeah, they're a horrible worker, but I don't want to hurt their feelings because I like them as a person. They're just a horrible worker, but like, that's something I had to come to grips with as I've gone on over the years. Is like, I'm not going to hire you back. Why? Well, I like you as a person, but you're a horrible worker. Like, that's just how it is. And it's like, and if I decide to keep that person on and they keep doing crappy work, then I'm to blame for that. That's not their fault. That's just who they are, and that's not saying that I can't help them try to improve, but some people just don't. Some people, it's just not their thing. And so it's super liberating once you realize that it's all on you, the owner. Then it's like, okay, well then I know what needs to be done.
So on a similar note, you had commented to me before we got started today that you wanted to talk about what you see coming for the organic industry. Because I think this is another one of those things, right? We can spend a lot of time complaining about the larger market forces that are having an impact on local and organic farms, or we can figure out how we're going to respond to those and take responsibility for our own actions and how we're actually going to react to that. Could you talk a little bit about what you see coming down the pike for organic farms?
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, I think it's regionally based. I think that every region or every demographic across the country has different constraints that make it different. So I'll just speak to like our area here in Southern Oregon, because we don't have a large metropolitan area that we support. And so I think in some ways we're kind of the canary in the mine shaft, kind of, we're seeing the effects probably sooner than other people see. And we're seeing the consolidation that's happening among distributors, and we're seeing some of the larger farms are just going direct to the stores now, which are cutting out that direct line that the smaller farmers have. I think that we're going to see the labor shortage is going to continue. Minimum wage is going up. Minimum wage here in Oregon just went up to, I think it's $10.25 now. And I know it's going to be up around $12 to $13 in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's a challenge. Where is it all going? I'm not really sure. I think that direct to consumer is really the key in the future. What does that look like? Does that mean that I distribute my vegetables through Amazon? Maybe, maybe that's why they bought Whole Foods. I don't know. I'm open to looking at anything. I'm really passionate about the the world of digital media, through, things like Instagram and even Snapchat for the younger generations. Like, how can I start utilizing those networks to reach out and find out what's really going on and figure out how to reach my consumer base better? I think that people don't realize the power of the internet that they have in their hands with their phones. And so I'm really intrigued by that. Like, there's a lot of direction that we can go as far as direct marketing goes there. I think you're going to see smaller farms have to find value added crops, whatever that is, whether it's processed or just higher dollar crops, and niche markets that, and it's like, well, how do you find those niche markets? Well, that's kind of where I think the world of digital media comes into play, is like going out there on that digital landscape and finding those marketplaces that want your hot sauce. That's one of the examples we're looking at right now, is like, how do we find widespread distribution and tell our story effectively to these potential buyers of this for our hot sauce. It's like, those are the questions I ask, because we're not in the organic farming world that we were in 2000. It's not the world that Elliot Coleman and Alice Waters created. It's not the world that Rodale and Alan Chadwick and the list goes on and on of all those elder farmers and elder movements. It's a new world we're in right now, and so I'm really looking to the future and not trying to get caught in like what I think that the architecture of organic farming should be based on what the past was. I'm looking forward. I hope that doesn't mean virtual carrots. I really am hoping.
Yeah, some days it does feel like that might be what the future brings.
Yeah.
With that, we're going to turn to our lightning round after we get a word from one more sponsor, and we'll be right back. This lightning round and perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it is truly a superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability that every farm needs. I've worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I am not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. And these really are small tractors with the kinds of features found on their four-wheel cousins and a wide array of equipment. Power harrows, rotary plows, flail mowers, snow throwers, sickle bar mowers, chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. Chris, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
Favorite tool on the farm currently, it's the flame weeder for sure, just because it's cut our costs so immensely.
And you said that's a whole bed flame weeder. You're not flaming individual rows with that. Is that right?
It's actually a 3-bed flame weeder. So it has 2 wings on the side and 1 in the middle.
What's your favorite crop to grow?
Currently peppers.
And why?
They taste amazing. They make great hot sauce. And I just love the way they grow, the structure of the plant, the leaves, everything about them. They feel futuristic and ancient at the same time to me.
And if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Probably invest in infrastructure sooner.
Investing in infrastructure can be so hard when you're a young farmer because you don't necessarily know where things are going in your operation.
I think that if I had known then what I know now, I probably would have reached out to more experienced farmers more and really tapped into what they had to say and not just ask them questions, but actually listen to their answers. That's something that I find young farmers do is they ask questions hoping they get the answers they want to hear. And often they get the answers that are the truth, and so being open to the truth instead of just hearing what you want to hear.
Chris, thank you so much for being part of the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 129 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and that you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Jagger. That's Jagger. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America. And by Rock Dust Local, the first company in North America specializing in local sourcing and delivery of the best rock dust and biochar for organic farming. And by Local Food Marketplace, providing an integrated, scalable solution for farms and food hubs to process customer orders, including online ordering, harvesting, packing, delivery, invoicing, and payment processing. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast right in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes and leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, when you talk to our sponsors, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I'm working to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com, and I will do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.